Hello, and welcome to MAGA, the podcast. Now, this is not your racist uncle's MAGA. Our MAGA stands for I'm an Angry Asshole, the cult of Donald Trump. And I am your host, the Disgusted American. The mission of our show is to show how Don the Con bamboozled a nation. Our goal is to help make sure that the cult of MAGA goes down in flames by 2028. We want to stop MAGA before it becomes unstoppable and our democracy further decays into a dictatorship. Now, if we want the cult of MAGA to end, we really have to know how it began and why it spread. We have to go back to Trump 1.0, the election of 2016. So in our last episode, we introduced Trump's first big lie, build the wall. He introduced this idea during his presidential candidacy announcement speech in 2015. And it went something like this. Mexico is sending rapists and criminals that bring crime to America. So we're going to build a wall to keep out all the bad Mexicans. And Mexico is going to pay for it. And Trump can build the wall cheap because he's a master at building walls. He also advised us not to trust politicians because politicians were incompetent posers who talked a lot but did very little. They were corrupt and in the back pockets of lobbyists. But we could trust Trump because he was really rich and incorruptible. In fact, he was going to use his own money to run for president, so nobody could ever buy him off. He finally announced that the American dream was dead and only he could bring it back. And so MAGA was born. Today's episode is going to explore the question, what the hell did build the wall actually mean? In the real world. And why did Trump pick this issue to kick off his first presidential campaign? Let's take a closer look at this big, beautiful wall that Donald Trump wanted to build. How long would it be? How much of the border would it actually cover? And how much would it cost?
During the 2016 election, Trump pledged to build a wall along the U.S.-Mexico border, which is almost 2,000 miles long. Then he said the wall would be 1,000 miles and cover half of the border, with natural barriers taking care of the rest. That estimate dropped to 500 miles by the 2020 election. In reality, by September of 2019, funding had only been approved for roughly 260 miles of replacement barriers. Now, as of September 19th, 2019, approximately 66 miles of old fencing has been replaced with a new barrier.
The claim has evolved and shifted. If you're trying to test it for truth, it doesn't really add up.
As we can hear from the audio, the estimates for the wall got shorter and shorter in terms of coverage. Less than 500 miles were ever built on this wall. And this wall occurred in places where barriers already stood. So there's very little new wall that was being constructed. And Trump's ethos claim, his credibility claim, his authenticity claim of he's a builder and he can build walls better than anybody and build them inexpensively. He quartered the wall at about $8 billion to get it done. Not true. The wall cost over $15 billion, covered 500 miles, a quarter of the border. And this is a perfect encapsulation of the Trump presidency. Half-assed and over budget. 500 miles of a 2,000-mile border. Pretty fucking useless. And that's the tragedy of America right now. Trump showed us during his first presidency that he's a clueless jackass. Why will we ever put him in charge again after he failed so spectacularly the first time around? And then there's the question of what the wall would look like. And Trump has some very interesting designs for this wall.
Breaking news tonight, an exclusive report in the New York Times documenting the lengths to which sources say President Trump was prepared to go to stop migrants crossing the southern border.
He wanted the wall electrified with spikes on top that could pierce human flesh.
The New York Times reports that privately, the president had often talked about fortifying a border wall with a water-filled trench stocked with snakes or alligators.
Snakes and fucking alligators for 2,000 miles on what is not flat ground. I mean, there are a ton of obstacles to building or normal wall along the border. We have private property rights, natural barriers like hills and rivers, Native American tribal lands, flooding, and other environmental damage. It would be exorbitantly expensive just to build a wall, much less a wall that's going to be protected by alligators and snakes. So if such a wall sounds like the ramblings of a dim-witted toddler, well, that's because it is. Now you may be saying, well, hey, you know what? Disgusted American, you might be too hard on Trump. Maybe he was playing 4D chess the whole time, and you're just not smart enough to understand how things really work with a grandmaster 4D chess player like Donald Trump. So did the wall work? Here's a fact-checking video from the Washington Post.
But it's not just the wall. Trump has broadly misrepresented the effectiveness of his immigration strategy. He tweeted a Mexican government chart on U.S. migration numbers that appeared to be designed to flatter him, but his own government's data show nearly 1 million migrants were arrested along the Mexico border in 2019 fiscal year that ended in September 30th, marking a 12-year high.
So how about that? It turns out that building a wall that only covers 25% of a border doesn't really deter desperate people from coming over. The number of crossings actually went up after the wall was built. And that's because walls don't work anymore. People could and did use ladders to climb over the wall, or they free climbed it. They used cheap power tools to cut through the fencing, or they would cut huge sections that they could drive through. In fact, one section in 2020 was sawed through at least 18 times in a month, according to the Border Patrol. And last but not least, they made tunnels. They Bugs Bunnied that shit. The same thing Bugs did in 1950, defeated this brilliant, beautiful wall. Obvious stuff. If you have a wall, go over it, go through it, go under it. It doesn't work. So if it didn't work on a practical level, what the hell was the point of this? Well, even though it was stupid practically, it worked brilliantly as a fairy tale to rile up the base. In case of emergency, just break out this bullshit story about building the wall.
In our database of Trump's false and misleading claims, the building the wall claim, it was the most repeated claim out of all 12,000 that we had tallied. He's just reinforcing this idea that he's fulfilled this campaign promise.
Trump uses the idea of the wall to mobilize his base, often tweeting about it during major political moments, like the 2018 midterm elections, the 2019 government shutdown, and the peak of the Mueller investigation.
Trump loved to use building the wall during times of crisis and at rallies. In fact, he told the editorial board of the New York Times during 2016 at his rallies, he said, you know, if it gets a little boring, if I see people starting to sort of maybe thinking about leaving, I can sort of tell the audience. I just say, we will build the wall. And they go nuts. He knows how to play the crowd. You got to hand it to him. He truly understands the mob mentality. Maybe that's why he loves his creepy pep rallies so damn much. But why did Trump go with building the wall as his first big promise? What was the reasoning behind that? Well, he's actually tapping into a long-time American tradition of hating and fearing immigrants. And this goes back a long, long way.
As urbanization took over many cities in the Northeast and along major railroads in the Midwest, factories sprang up demanding unskilled laborers, and many immigrants fit that description. They produced goods cheaper, which made artisans lower their prices, but many could not compete and folded. This financial crisis experienced by Americans in northern cities created a cry for help from politicians to help them economically and fight back against immigration, which many of these Americans saw as the ultimate problem. A Catholic conspiracy frequently headlined newspapers and became the talk of the town about how Catholics would overwhelm Protestants in the United States and allow the Pope and the Vatican to take over. Since the 1830s, the Americans concerned with that problem had threw their lot in with the Whigs. Whigs fought against immigration.
Back in the 1830s, it was the Catholics that were terrifying aliens. And while the identity of the barbarian hordes keeps changing, the core American value was always present. Immigrants are to be feared. If Trump could shake up some conceptions around safety and immigrants, he might have something in terms of gaining traction for his presidency. So he starts to fuse immigrants with this idea of violent crime. One of his earliest examples was using the wall built between El Paso and Juarez, Mexico. In Trump's estimation, El Paso was a dangerous place to be until they built the wall separating themselves and Juarez. There's always been an interesting dichotomy there. El Paso has always been one of America's safest cities, and during the height of some of the drug wars in Mexico, Juarez was the most dangerous city in the world. Here they were, separated only by a few miles. The wall was not the reason why El Paso was safe. Their ranking as a safe city happened well before the wall. But the way Trump told it, El Paso went from a hellhole to being super safe overnight when the wall was put up. He repeated that claim several times, even in rallies in El Paso itself, where the locals knew that it wasn't a crazy, unsafe place, that was a bullshit story, right? Trump could hardly be more wrong around El Paso and safety. But that's the thing about Trump's stories. Even though the story of the El Paso Wonderwall was never true, he did not let truth get in the way of a good story. The wall saved El Paso. So again, Trump wanted this idea of let me conflate immigrants with crime. Let me start to associate people seeking asylum with being gang members or being drug traffickers. If I can create and link this false narrative of immigrants to crime, then maybe I can scare people into joining my coalition and voting. It's a long-term tactic that goes back hundreds of years. So not only were these immigrants dangerous and unsafe, but they're invading America. That was another big part of his message. During the 2016 presidential campaign, Trump threw out this number that there were between 30 million and 34 million illegal immigrants in the United States. Now, PolitiFact, the well-known and respected fact-checking organization, ruled that statement as pants on fire, one of their biggest distinctions for a lie. There was no evidence supporting that number. In fact, Pew Research Center estimated the number at being around 12.2 million people. Big difference, right, between 12 million and 32 million people. And of course, as part of this invasion, Trump also asserted that these folks were taking all these American jobs, right, stealing our jobs from hardworking Americans. And this is happening everywhere. But when you actually look at the numbers, the U.S. Labor Board reported that it was about 5% of the American workforce were folks that were undocumented. And let's be honest, these were not jobs that Americans were clamoring for. There were not long lines of people looking to pick vegetables in the hot sun or to butcher animals in a slaughterhouse. And speaking of animals, this was the last part of Trump's immigration pitch: to dehumanize immigrants, to make them lesser than, so that he could create us versus them tribes. Us, the noble Americans, and them, the scary immigrant hordes who were not really people, but they were animals. And an example of this was during his 2016 campaign. He loved to tell the story. He told it over and over again about the lady and the snake. It's one of his favorite stories, a cautionary tale on immigration. And here it is in his own words.
Who has heard the poem called The Snake? So I have it. Does anybody want to hear it again? You sure? Are you sure? Okay. So let's dedicate this to General Kelly, the Border Patrol, and the ICE agents for doing such an incredible job. All right? This was written by Al Wilson a long time ago. And I thought of it having to do with our borders and people coming in. And we know what we're going to have. We're going to have problems. We have to very, very carefully vet. We have to be smart. We have to be vigilant. So here it is, the snake. It's called The Snake. On her way to work one morning, down the path along the lake, a tender-hearted woman saw a poor, half-frozen snake. His pretty-colored skin had been all frosted with the dew. "Poor thing," she cried, "I'll take you in, and I'll take care of you." The border. "Take me in, O tender woman. Take me in, for heaven's sake. Take me in, O tender woman," sighed the vicious snake. She wrapped him up all cozy in a comforter of silk and laid him by her fireside with some honey and some milk. She hurried home from work that night, and as soon as she arrived, she found that pretty snake she'd taken in had been revived. "Take me in, O tender woman. Take me in, for heaven's sake. Take me in, O tender woman," sighed that vicious snake. She clutched him to her bosom. "You're so beautiful," she cried. "But if I hadn't brought you in by now, oh heavens, you would have died." She stroked his pretty skin again and kissed him and held him tight. But instead of saying thank you, that snake gave her a vicious bite. "Take me in, O tender woman. Take me in, for heaven's sake. Take me in, O tender woman," sighed the vicious snake. "I have saved you," cried the woman, "and you've bitten me, heavens why? You know your bite is poisonous, and now I'm going to die." "Oh, shut up, silly woman," said the reptile with a grin. "You knew damn well I was a snake before you took me in."
Can you hear it, folks? Can you hear the glee in his voice when he tells this poem? Why does it make him so happy? Well, it's because he's the vicious snake. America is the fool that keeps taking him in. Nothing makes a con man happier than knowing he got over on a mark. But during this episode, we really took a look and started to unpack Trump's first big lie, build the wall. We talked about what he promised and why he promised it. And the reality is building the wall was always a batshit crazy idea. It shouldn't have worked, but it did. In our next episode, we're going to explore why did build the wall really start to gain traction and establish Trump as a viable presidential candidate. That's all we have for this week. Appreciate everyone tuning in. If you want to help out the channel, please subscribe or follow us on your favorite podcasting platform and tell your fellow disgusted Americans where they can find us so they can give us a listen. If you have a few moments, please leave us a rating on your platform. As always, new episodes drop on Wednesday. Appreciate you tuning in. Look forward to talking to you soon. Have a great night, folks.